Hi, it's Meg Major with Winsight Grocery Business. Joining us today for Grocery COVID Live in our afternoon segment is our executive editor, John Springer, our content manager, Kat Martin, our senior editor, Jen Straley, and of course, supermarket guru, Phil Lempert. We're going to begin quickly, Phil, as we talked about before we went live, to talk about the volume of news that is coming at each of us at such a rapid pace. It's really become a little bit more difficult to discern which is really rising to the top of our interest pool. And one thing that is funny, especially, is the dietary habit shifting that we've been trending that has been trending this week that we've been tracking. Jen and Kat and I and John have all been sort of talking about how our own personal purchase behaviors have shifted. How about your own, Phil? Are you seeing any changes in your household behavior?
Probably not. But in talking to a lot of people, in fact, I was on the phone with an editor from Bloomberg this morning, and she was sharing with me how she has seen her household switch dramatically from a lot of natural and healthy foods to, for breakfast this morning, she had Oreos. So I think that you're right. We are moving more to comfort foods. And in this shift, one of the things that I think is really interesting, and Nielsen has some data on this globally, not only just here in the US, that people are moving away from the more natural cleaners and the more natural soaps, and they're now shifting back to, the petrochemical stuff that they know is going to work. So it'll be interesting to see after COVID-19 whether or not we give our heart back to the planet, or if we're going to stick with the petrochemical based soaps and cleaners.
Definitely. And John, you were talking before we went on air too about some behavior shifts that I found interesting as well.
Well, there's a lot. I mean, with what Phil just said, I would imagine that part of that shift is going to be economically driven, right? People are just not going to reach into their wallets for an extra dollar for the better stuff, and part of it also is the supply issue with the bigger brands and the brands that are more able to meet mass quantities. That's what stores are going with, and the smaller stuff isn't fitting on the truck. So maybe they won't have to necessarily choose between them for at least a little while.
Well, it could also be sort of like the conundrum of the organic and conventional produce way back when you actually, what is the message? So eating more produce was certainly better at the risk of demonizing organics, but I do think that there's going to be, maybe the manufacturers feel of more natural products are going to have to make a stronger case for their potency and the abilities to disinfect every bit as well as the conventionals.
See, Meg, you're bringing up a real good point where I think that what this is going to do is this is going to take the natural industry, and I'm not talking about food, but just cleaners for right now. And they're going to have to really put on their labels, their efficacy, their testing. They might even have to change their formulas to be better. I mean, right now, still here in Los Angeles, I go in the stores are maybe 60 to 65% stocked. But when it comes to that cleaning aisle, everything's gone. So, we're not there yet. But I think after this, you're going to see a lot of changes for brands like Method and Seventh Generation, and then the claims that they're able to substantiate.
Yeah. And it'll come down to promotions, affordability, economics, et cetera. Kat, also when we were, before we went live, you had also mentioned an interesting promotion that Hy-Vee is doing to captivate a little bit of a different shopper.
Yeah, so Hy-Vee had taken a look at what's selling right now, and not surprisingly, a lot of hair care products are selling. Everybody's having to dye their hair at home now, cover up those gray roots.
Not everybody.
Yeah, some of us are going au naturel, hair dye. And so what they have decided to do is kind of capitalize on that. And so tomorrow and Saturday, they're offering 15% off those hair care products because that's what's selling right now. Give the consumers a little bit of a price cut, and encourage them to buy something at Hy-Vee that maybe they typically haven't purchased there.
Correct.
It's interesting with Hy-Vee because they were, I think, Kat, you wrote about last week how they were adding shoe departments in store as
Yes.
well. So, I mean, that's another thing. Look, smart retailers have a good opportunity here to try and serve their communities even better, especially when they're the only game in town. And so they've got to be commended for making those deals and getting that stuff together.
But I guess I have to wonder about Hy-Vee. If they have this promotion for Friday and Saturday, giving 15% off, they've already seen a rise in volume of that. Are we going to be faced with out of stocks on, beauty and hair care products because people are buying them and they're giving a deeper discount?
Maybe.
Potentially. I do know, those products have been selling like gangbusters. I think they did the wave where it was, toilet paper, cleaning products, freezer items, and now it's the self-care product. But I would assume that Hy-Vee would realize that they'd have to have a pretty nice stock of that already. So, otherwise they don't want to tick off customers that they're maybe encouraging to come into the stores.
I think customers are concerned about their hair, but not panicking about it right now.
Right.
Hey, speak for yourself, John. Yeah.
The other thing that I found really interesting is what Publix is doing. You mentioned about the community, that Publix is reaching out and basically giving food to food pantries, working directly with farmers. So that brings up two things. One is that's great for Feeding America. It's really important. We've all seen the TV stories of the miles of lines to go to food banks. But I'm wondering, does this create a new supply chain model for Publix and other retailers, going direct to the farmer and, eliminating that distribution channel for produce?
A good question. I think that, again, Phil, in my view, we're going to have to do the old wait and see. I think the whole supply chain shifts are going to be so dramatic, and really, that's a very provocative thought. I hadn't really thought of that. So I think that...
Yeah, and I wonder also, with all the talk about how farmers can't get their products, whether it's milk, whether it's produce, to the chains because of the transportation problem, the distribution problem, and they're having to plow their crops in the fields and dump milk and all this, whether or not it really highlights a very fragile part of our system that is going to go direct.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think a lot of those suppliers that have been affected, that Publix was talking about, primarily we're doing business with restaurants and food service and schools and, parts of the food chain that don't necessarily sell with Publix. So from Publix's point of view, I'm sure this is a great opportunity for them to make better relationships with these guys. Maybe it's quite possible they're buying quite a bit from them already for their stores, but rather than dump the milk, let's give it away. Let's find, a secondary channel to distribute it.
Yeah, and also let's remember that all these retailers have trucks and warehouses and, to backhaul, to go to a farm and pick up, a trailer load of blueberries or whatever, might be a very efficient way and also keep prices down. I'm interested in what all of you think about the announcement that Cisco, the food service distributor, to build on John's point about food service being a different channel, that now they're experimenting with a pop-up grocery format. Number one, the question to all: do you think it's a good idea? Number two, what are the stumbling blocks that they're going to have?
Any thoughts? I'll be happy to jump in. I think it's a pretty great idea, honestly, because I think that for every innovation by way of bringing customers at least a little bit of different options, and also perhaps just reaching new audiences and new ways to sell your products. There's a lot of stores around the country that are still in shortages in a lot of categories. So if that helps bring a little bit more relief to the chain, that's good. What do you think, Jen?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got to figure out a way to move this food and not throw it away. So I think these, some really innovative ideas are coming out of this, and I think that sounds like a solid concept.
But what happens? What happens to that relationship between that food service truck and a consumer? And a consumer's used to being able to go into the supermarket, look at a variety of products in consumer packaged sizes, 10 ounces of corn instead of a number 10 tin of corn, and just does it do more damage? I understand we don't want food to spoil. I understand that we have this supply chain problem, but I just wonder about the consumer experience on that. John, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I know that we've talked on this show even before about the food service distributors getting into grocery delivery. There was another one that announced that this week, Woolco, which is another big restaurant supplier in this part of the world. And they're just finding that, one, just like Publix is doing for the farmers, they've got supply that's got to go someplace, or it's going to go bad, or it's going to get thrown out. So direct to consumer is one option for that. Now, for the consumer, I've looked at all these sites and I've fantasized about buying, the kinds of things that but I've got a family of 3. It's not enough for us to, buy, they're of course selling in big quantities, right? Restaurant size quantities. So it's not quite right for me, but I think it might be kind of fun, for an adventurous consumer. Maybe you got a group or a family or an extended family kind of go in on these deals the way you might at a Costco or what have you. Hey, why not give it a shot? This is unusual times.
And Kat, what do you think about this idea for Chicago?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking also, I think it's a great idea to get the food into hands of people who can consume it. But I do also wonder about some of the pricing aspects of it. Like when they see that they can, I think we mentioned this earlier in the week, when they can see a big bag of soup or whatever for $10, and then you see the normal retail size for, right, much higher per serving. I just wonder if it might be, it's great right now. If people start thinking, I wonder why they charge so much at the grocery store.
You're bringing up a really good point. And what I've noticed with a lot of restaurants with takeout, the prices on their food have remained the same, but beer and wine in particular, they're selling wines at 50% off. So, and I hadn't thought about it in that way. I wonder when the restaurant reopens, whether or not they're going to have some pushback where, somebody's going to say, hey, when you were closed, takeout, the wine cost me $12. Now you're back to selling it to me at $30. What's up?
I think probably most people are aware of that markup, and typically is most high in adult beverages.
You're paying for the experience of eating in a restaurant too, and I think there's going to be a period once the restaurants reopen that they're going to be they're going to be courting us to come back, and they're not going to be able to have as many people in the restaurant at one time, and there'll probably be some enticing offers in terms of food and beverage pricing.
No, I think you're right. Also, when we look at the whole restaurant experience, what we've seen, and we've talked about this before, both in grocery business and on COVID-19, there's going to be less seats, as you point out, Jen. And what happens to those grocerants that, the supermarket business has really been going after? Do we think that, they're going to have to do special deals to get people to sit in a supermarket and eat? And will people even want to sit in a supermarket and eat because, you've got all these people around you now?
It's a great question. And the answer is, I don't know. We're thinking about this in different ways, right? Restaurants with fewer seats, supermarkets with less, max capacity. I hate to say it again, all roads lead to e-commerce here. It's just, it makes too much sense for people who are once scared of supermarkets, everything. But in terms of entertaining yourself and going out to eat, I would just love to go down to the pub like we used to just once a week and just sit down and have somebody else serve us for a while. But I think for a lot of people, it's going to become an issue of how much can they afford. If unemployment is as big as it's looking now, and a recession as bad as some people are saying it's going to be a tough time for everybody after a little while.
Let me ask you, John, about e-commerce. I heard that Trader Joe's says that they're not going to be doing curbside pickup or grocery delivery, that Trader Joe's really wants to focus on that consumer experience. Question for all, good move, bad move?
For Trader Joe's, that's part of their differentiation strategy. Basically, we don't waste our money or devote our money to that, and we want people coming into the store. That worked for them until now, and we'll see what happens going forward. But they don't have that expense that everybody else has.
Sorry. I'm sorry, John. What was that last thought?
I was just saying that the one advantage of not having e-commerce right now is that you're not incurring all those expenses to try and get it done and irritating your customers.
Right. I think too, Phil, it's sort of like commendable that they're picking a lane and sticking in it and sort of not, bolting on the e-commerce as many folks have done on the fly. So you give everybody credit, but I do agree 100% with what John said. It just mirrors its strategy all along. Jen's really our Trader Joe's specialist, so I'd be curious to also hear Jen's thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think, Trader Joe's business model is different from all of these, major supermarket chains that are throwing themselves, full force into e-commerce. Trader Joe's is a store brand store. It's all private label, and it's very well priced and, very loyal shoppers. I don't see, and we keep talking about how much of this e-commerce shopper is going to stick. The numbers are through the roof.
Right.
But, studies are saying that maybe only 27% of people who are new adopters now will stick with e-commerce shopping once they can go back into the stores.
Well, and also the times are very different now than they were. Again, a couple weeks ago, if you ordered from Instacart or anybody else, you'd have to wait 4 or 5 days. So last night, I ordered from Instacart, and it was here this morning. Wow. So that whole supply chain is really catching up, and maybe part of it is what you said, Jen. Maybe part of it is people are disappointed in that experience, so they've decided not to go back and they're going to go into stores, or maybe it's just they've filled their pipelines. I'd also, Kat, like to ask you, being in Chicago again, what's going on with all these meat packing facilities closing? I mean, like every 5 minutes, it seems that we're hearing about another meat packing plant closing, and what's going to be the impact? Are we going to see those shortages in our supermarket?
Yeah, I mean, I have family and friends who live in Iowa. I grew up in Iowa, where a lot of the meat processing facilities are. And so it's a big concern to them, because obviously these people go out into the community. So, when they have, a mass grouping of 300 or however many people coming down with COVID-19, that's scary. But, and I think a lot of it is the workers themselves are starting to get scared, because so many people are testing positive now that they don't want to go to work. They don't want to put themselves in danger in close proximity. So I think the processing companies themselves are having to figure out how can they alleviate this fear. Several have shut down indefinitely. The state of Iowa now is having every employee at the meat processing plants tested. And the thing with that is, you can test one day And if you're not quarantining, you have to be tested again the next day because you've come in contact with other people. So I don't know exactly what their process is going to be for that, but they are taking that step that every employee now is going to be tested, whether they're symptomatic or not. But I think it's something that is going to start having an effect. You know, these plants can't stay shut down and have our food supply continue to run like it had before. I mean, there's a reason we have the plants we have. So
do prices go up? Are there shortages? Do more people become vegan and vegetarian or flexitarian and just stop consuming as much meat as they normally did?
You know, maybe. I do think we'll probably see some shortages. Prices may go up. Jen might know a bit more about this, but, you know, I did see where the CEO of Impossible Foods sees this as a great opportunity, you know, so whether people will be willing to try, you know, the meat alternatives if they can't get the meat that they want, maybe.
Jen?
Yeah, I think I mean, one thing, you know, I am a huge fan of plant-based foods, but I did notice at the beginning of all this that the only products that were still available in my local grocery store in the meat department were the plant-based alternatives. There was no actual meat. So I think, you know, there's still this comfort food thing, this going back to like eating foods that you grew up with. And for a lot of people, you know, that was meat and potatoes. And I think if it's a matter of that, you know, there simply isn't the supply in the stores, then that might open the opportunity to try some, you know, expand their horizons and try some new plant-based alternatives. But if they're faced with both options, I think people are going to continue to buy.
Phil, especially as we're heading into peak grilling season. So, I mean, I think that's where maybe it will also come home to roost a little bit so that we can see how behaviors will shift when, honestly, we get out of the houses and more into our backyard settings and to see what goes on the grill. So maybe instead of plant-based substitutes for meat, it could go more into a lot more grilling of vegetables and non-traditional things such as grilled pizzas. So I think there's opportunities not just to replace meat with a meat substitute, but other similar dishes that people maybe have been reluctant, but now do have some more time to experiment with.
Let's talk a bit about the whole barbecue thing. You're bringing up a real good point because barbecues are a big promotion for grocery retailers. Let's say, you know, we're still distancing, we're still not able to have big parties and so on. What effect is that going to have on this year's barbecue roll up to the 4th of July?
Perish the thought. Let's just hope for the best that we can get past there and have 4th of July barbecues to look forward to.
Okay. But still, you're
100% right.
Yeah, we've got to be thinking about that. You know, the last thing that I want to do is go to a barbecue with everybody wearing masks. I mean, that just doesn't do much for me.
True. I think it'll just be interesting in the meantime as we make our way through the closures and opening back up in coming the summer months. Really, and then I hate to be a downer too, but if the ricochet effect of COVID-19 comes back around, as they were saying yesterday and the day before, the CDC, that, you know, that will be interesting. So I think that my advice certainly to myself and to everybody out there would be start experimenting with things, with e-commerce and with new purchase methods and times of day, because e-commerce, again, is not labor free. It's very easy, but there's still thought process. There's still a transaction going on between you and a merchant. So it's almost like I think it's going to be important to take the rebalancing months, God willing, we are able to experience that and kind of figure things out.
Do you think that because of this e-com experience and we saw the volume that we're going to see retailers, I think that probably the past 6 months before COVID-19, we started seeing retailers pulling away from third-party delivery services and trying to do it themselves. Does this hasten that process, or the retailer just throws up their hands and say, I don't want any part of this?
Well, I'd say that yes and yes, right? The third party isn't going to go away because the volume is such now that they're going to need as much help as they can get.
Right.
I also think that companies that have been careful about doing it themselves, primarily Walmart, is in very good shape, and is likely to come out in very good shape from this issue. You'll see larger guys like Kroger moving toward that. We've talked before about how the demand has kind of come sooner than these guys have gotten their arms around, the ability to do that. But I think that that's got to be the move. The more that they can control, the better off they are. The retailers that control their own supply chain, they don't want to outsource, that which they don't need to outsource. So, yes, I think they'll try to get a better handle on it, but no, I don't think they're going to necessarily give up all the help they're getting from outside vendors and experts at these things.
But look, John, what we were also talking about earlier this morning is all of these hiring blitzes are still coming around. So
Yep.
We're going to be continuing that coverage as well. But do you have the retail grocers and other retailers competing with the likes of Instacart who continue to actively seek new workers by the thousands? So, I mean, I think that
hundreds of thousands. They just announced another 200. They're going after another 250,000 workers. Instacart. They want to get back to next day, as Phil said. He was lucky enough to get next day delivery and same day deliveries so in key areas like Massachusetts and New York, they're looking to ramp up by 250,000.
And you know what? The labor pool's there for them. So
yeah.
Right now it is. But what's going to happen when everything reopens?
Right.
Will people leave, Instacart? Jen, for our last story today, before we close up, I want to ask you, because you're really, our expert of the UFCW. I just saw their report that they had a 5,000 person study with 96% responding that they were worried about being exposed to COVID-19 in the workplace, meaning grocery stores. At least 30 union members across the country have died from COVID-19, and they report at least 3,000 members are no longer at work because they've been exposed to the virus. What are you hearing?
Well, they were meeting actually while we were while we were talking today. And they have, with regard to we've been talking a lot about what they've been doing for retailers and asking for them for the grocery workers to be classified as essential workers so that they would have access to the same PPE equipment and all of that testing as healthcare workers. And so today's topic was that they have written to the CDC to ask them to mandate safety protocol for the meat processing facility workers, and they want an immediate stopping of these lines, faster lines. They had, I guess, some of these processing plants had workers that allowed them to speed up the processing. They want an immediate stop to that. They want an immediate supply of PPE equipment to these folks. They want social distancing and access to testing. So they're ramping up, looking after the safety of the frontline workers in process.
Jen, to your point, in this time of wanting more guidance, it's also a time where regulations have been relaxed. You mentioned the
Absolutely.
plants have been able to speed up, which is putting workers in closer contact than they were before. And there is a great concern because I think over 2,000 of the meat processing employees have been tested positive and 17 have died. So, they're at just as much risk as, the grocery workers that we've always said, are frontline. These people in the plants also are frontline to the union.
Also, let's not forget that when we look at FDA and USDA, those departments in the past 3 years have really been cut. They're operating about half the staff that they used to have. So, how do we get these regulations back to being enforced? that, were laxed by speeding up the poultry lines and so on. So I agree with what UFCW is saying, but we have a big void when it comes to the government really instituting and monitoring these things.
It's been a catastrophe all around.
Yep. And on that high note, I want to remind everybody that next week we'll go back to our regular times, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9:30 a.m. Pacific, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Also, all of our episodes are right on Winsight Grocery Business. Be sure to check them out if you missed any, and be sure to give us your comments and your notes. You probably saw me looking down at my iPhone a number of times to see comments, and I am on the wrong page where I see our video, but I don't see comments. So I'll go through the comments later, and we'll start on Tuesday looking at some of those comments. Sorry about that. And have a great weekend all, and a safe weekend. And thank you for joining us.
Great chatting, Phil. Thank you.